So the pandemic has forced the digitalization of the workplace, and for the last year, remote work and homeschooling have been friendly enemies of working parents. We got today three amazing speakers that are parents themselves and at the same time work. We got from academia, we got Rachel Ashman. She's senior lecturer in marketing at the University of Liverpool, and she's currently researching about work-life balance during the pandemic. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, Julia.
Oh, thank you for joining. We got also Kate. She's the owner of My Apparel, an online sustainable fashion marketplace and host of Fashion Talks Book Club. And she is also currently now working to expand her business and design her own line of garments. Is it true, Kate?
It is true. It is true. Yes. You would have thought I would learn my lesson, but no, I have to go forth and be part of the mix. If I'm going to do it, I do it properly and sustainably.
Yeah, that's great.
Oh, thanks for having me, Julia.
Oh, more than happy to have you, Kate. And last but not least, we got Ian. We wanted to represent all the voices in this well-needed conversation. And he's a great advocate of gender equality. So Ian Dinwiddie, founder of Inspiring Dads and co-host of Lockdown Dad podcast. Hi, Ian.
Hi, Julia. Nice to be here.
Great. So let's start from the very beginning. What are the key issues that women have faced during this pandemic? Maybe, Kate, you can start by sharing your experience as business owner and mom of two.
Well, yeah, I'm a mum of two girls, different age sets. So I've got one in year 4 and one in year 1. And the first part of the pandemic, I kind of felt everything stopped, didn't it? The whole planet kind of stopped. So I would say there wasn't that much homeschooling going on. I think we tried. The first week, even the girls put their uniforms on still, and even that dwindled to by Friday they were in their pajamas. and it got to the point where there wasn't, bless the schools, the schools do what they can, but they were all off as well. And I think there was no consistency, there was no structure. And that's what I need. I need someone to tell me how to teach my kids, because I don't know what to do. I'm not a teacher at the end of the day. And so I felt like the first pandemic, everything was just a bit like out the water. It was sunny, just go and enjoy yourself, go in the garden. And then they finally went back to school in September, which was fantastic. And then I find this third lockdown has been more harder. And I think, weirdly enough, it's because we got that structure from school, and my day 9 till 3 was dedicated to the kitchen table, sat with their iPad and Macs opposite each other, and me sat with my youngest teaching her syllabus all the time, and then obviously just telling my eldest, get on with it, or that 5-minute, right, do this, and you can be left alone. And then the thread that leads through all of this is, of course, I run my own business, but so does my husband as well. He owns his own business. So the whole pandemic has probably had us up to here with anxiety and stress anyway. And then we've got the children and trying to teach them as well, and running our businesses in a place where I'm an online clothes shop. So not many people were buying stuff unless you were a quick turnaround with loungewear, which I'm not. Also not in fast fashion, so I wouldn't. So yeah, it was about pivoting and changing and taking a step back, really, and kind of like having a feeling and understanding of what to do during the pandemic. And then, yeah, so it's been hard. And I was one who did the homeschooling. My husband did 3 days, and he, bless him, he's brilliant. We're very much sharer, but he's one of those that, I don't know what you're talking about. It was easy. And, and you could we really could kill you right now. Yeah, it's been difficult. I can't do it all. And I think I burnt out twice during it. definitely. It definitely burnt out. Like, I locked the door, I went upstairs and I went, enough, I can't do it anymore, I hate you all, go away. It's a combination of trying to work, trying to be creative, trying to homeschool the kids, put out fights, tearing them apart, cooking dinner, tidying up. The house is always a bomb because everyone's in it. It's just relentless. And then you get up and you do it all over again. So yeah.
I think, well, Rachel also has two. And what I was amazed is that you use this opportunity to research about this impact and how the pandemic affected your life as a worker, but also as a family. Any chance you can share some of your findings?
Yeah, so hi everyone. I've got at the start of the lockdown, I had a 2 and a 3-year-old boys and 2 full-time jobs, academic research-based jobs running in our house. So as Kate described, it was a bit of a shock when everything just sort of dissolved into nothingness. And we sort of coped with that by what we call round robining. So splitting the day up. I think most people did this and sort of trying to cope with splitting the day and trying to prioritize who had what. So during that time, I've been working with another academic called Laura Radcliffe. And we were a bit grisly about all this, to be honest. We were feeling a bit othered and like it was difficult, but we could also feel of significant tension around the fact that all of our childless co-workers were, in our eyes, being given, free research passes to do whatever they want and lots of opportunities for things like research funding. So at that time, we had a bit of money in a pot and we decided to do a study on employed mothers who were homeschooling and working during the lockdown. And some of the things that we found that affected women were this roller coaster of emotions, feeling sort of brilliant on the one hand in that moment where you felt that you were doing it all and you were able to do this and I've got this and I can homeschool and I'm working and I'm also at home and I don't have any mum guilt, but tempered with feelings of extreme anxiety. Same as Kate has said, burnout, I cannot do this anymore, I cannot take it anymore. So these big extremes and a big roller coaster around things such as time, so time being a major issue, and also these different emotions as women were essentially mobilized as key actors in the national fight against COVID-19 because they've been given an 11-hour working day, a 6-hour schooling day, and 7 hours to do everything else.
And Ian, can you share with us, you're a dad, but at the same time, you're a coach to other fathers. And how has the pandemic affected dads as partners of these working women?
I think dads have experienced things in a different way, and it's something we'll come on to, I think, in more greater detail later on. Because although the initial data from Office of National Statistics showed that women were doing significantly more of the sort of domestic unpaid labour, but men were also doing a lot more than they previously had done. Some of those trends, I think, have rolled back, and Rachel will know more about this than I would. But I think some of those trends have rolled back since those initial kind of early sort of March, April time. There's possibly some of the novelty, some of the excitement, some of that change of pattern. And actually, in some ways, the early part of the pandemic, if you weren't directly involved in, frontline caring, or if you didn't have sort of relatives who were ill and were suffering, then actually that change of pace was something that a lot of dads and a lot of people more generally, I think, really quite enjoyed, to do something differently, over and above some of the mental health challenges that we also experience. So what men have found is that actually it's shone a light for many, many men on the inequalities and perhaps the amount of effort that goes into running a household, which is traditionally being a role that women have done. And for a lot of men, that's been quite exciting. It's been being able to put to one side the commute and maybe the expectations for after work socializing, which I think a lot of men feel that they have to be involved in. And let's be honest, a lot of men enjoy that as well. Men and women enjoy that. But it allowed them to be at home and be more actively involved with their children, sort of first and foremost. And some of that is sort of fed over into more equality at home in a sense, and I think up to a point, because I think it's still, the stats around furlough, TUC looked at details around how likely were working mums and working dads likely to be furloughed. I think it was about equal, but very few men actually took part in the survey. And there's issues around key workers are much more likely to be women. Homeschool, we've already talked about, experiences of Kate in particular. That resonates with me because actually in our household, my wife's a partner in a law firm, and my coaching business is to a certain degree, still in the developmental stage. And so I was able to, by necessity and also by the dynamics of the business, I just kind of stopped doing things. Partly I stopped doing things because budgets got cut and a piece of the work that I had lined up couldn't happen. But I sort of see it as a man, I've sort of seen it from the other side. But I think the most important thing about this is that there are quite significant numbers of working dads who previously hadn't been that involved in their children on a day-to-day basis, and that involved in the unpaid work at home, who are potentially seeing the next 6 months to a year as an opportunity to hang on to some of those benefits, accepting that it's far from perfect, and that actually for a lot of men have been quite happy to shut themselves away, unfortunately. But I think there are benefits there alongside some of the challenges that we're seeing and continue to see in terms of redundancy, furlough, and women leaving the workplace.
And connecting with that new perspective, let's say, or that new world for dads, do you think the companies and the governments are catching up to support working dads? Because it is a reality that dads now want to get more involved in this parenting duties.
Yeah, not as far along in the thought process I think they need to be. There was a really interesting piece, it was the Liz Truss, the Minister for Equalities, I hope I got the title right, who was talking last week, it must have been last week, so talking last week about flexible working and this sense that flexible working was a key enabler of equality to a certain extent, but also she positioned it very much as being flexible working is for mums who can therefore, because they use it much more than men do. We're talking about mums particularly and dads, but I think we should really be talking about flex for all. And that's part of the messaging that I don't think's there from the government at the moment, is that whether you're a carer or not, or whether you have responsibility, just you don't want to be tied to a particular way of working in terms of location or time, then it's important that everyone has choices. And actually, for a large number of office-based jobs, then what the pandemic has shown us is it's entirely possible to work either remotely or on different hours and get the work done. Not everyone believes that is a good thing or it's something they want to do. You only have to look at Goldman Sachs, a boss of Goldman Sachs, saying it was an aberration. Flexible working was an aberration. But then they have they've spent an enormous amount of money on a new headquarters. So there are reasons behind this. But I think generally, government in particular is lagging behind. And actually, I think when government do start to make changes which fit into legislation, something like shared parental leave, for instance, whereas before that happened, then men were not getting extended leave from work to look after their children. That wasn't a thing. Once the government starts indicating the direction of travel, then I think lots of other things become possible.
And Kate, how, as business owners, both you and your partner, how do you feel? Because you're your own boss. So it's different from someone that works for a company, that yourself that manage everything, and your partner too.
Yeah, so it's good and bad, obviously, isn't it? It's like we can do what we want when we want because we choose our own hours and we choose what we do and when we do it. But yeah, and then in another way, it's obviously we've both chosen. My husband was always freelance, and then he moved into his own business, And I've always been corporate. I've always had that 9 till 5 structure. And it's not even 9 to 5. I worked in fashion. So it's 6 till whenever you get to leave in the evening, you know, and that's how and that was one of the main reasons I wanted to come out of corporate. And I still got that I've been doing it since I was 16. So, I did it for all my working life in corporate. And it's still ingrained in me now. If I'm not sat down at my desk between 9 and 5, I'm like, oh God, I'm all out of sorts. So to have homeschooling kind of like mess up with my own routine, everything that goes out the door really. And it's definitely something that I felt this time around, because with lockdown 3, I feel like we have not all been in it together in a sense. And I'm probably going to play devil's advocate here and against, men and women. But I did feel from an outsider point of view, we didn't put our children in school. We are not care work. We're not, we're not care workers or anything. And so we couldn't put our children in school if we wanted to. But I did feel like there was this kind of manipulation of the system of loopholing to get your child into school so people could get on with their work. And also I didn't understand why it was only one parent. If your one parent is a key worker and the other one wasn't, you still get to put your child in school. And most of them were female. So why couldn't the male homeschool? Because if it was the male key worker, more than likely the children would not be in school and the mother would look after. So I just felt this whole third lockdown has been very bizarre. And from a working point of view, I mean, you can get if you want to, get really bitter, but it's just an interesting kind of point of view that we see with people who have to work for businesses and companies. And it's been fantastic that people do get that flexibility. It's not healthy not seeing your children or wife. My dad worked all the hours. My parents divorced because of his work ethic. So I've seen it firsthand how it can break families apart, and it's not healthy. And it wasn't until he divorced he realised he had to be there for his children, kind of too late after a 25-year marriage. You know what I mean? So it's been really important. We've been very fortunate, the fact that since my first has been born, my husband has had that flexibility of being a freelancer, and he has been there to see the kids grow up. And then when he has to work, and he goes off and he has to do what he does in his work. And it's the same with me. So, but you have to give yourself time off and be strict with it when you're in your own business. Otherwise, we are just working when we can all the time. So, probably didn't answer your question. Completely forgot what the question was. Sorry, just went on a ramble.
No, it's good. It's just to see, if as business owners, you feel supported, and these measures that the government took.
Government support, we haven't had any. I'm one of the excluded. I'm a limited company. I'm, where I do what I've been told to do by my accountant and the government many years ago, which is why they set up businesses like this. My husband got some support at the beginning because he has a place of work. However, he's still been able to open. He hasn't been forced closed. So we've been fortunate that even though a lot of stuff got cancelled for his work, hell of a lot of stuff like change, loads of things got cancelled at the beginning. And it was, again, I think the first month of lockdown, I think everyone was I was a zombie, always in tears, watching friends and our own businesses kind of crumble. And and from there on, thankfully, he has been busy every week. And if we didn't have that, I don't even want to begin what kind of financial situation we would be in, kind of thing. But we've had no help from the government, nothing. And that is because we are we're not even self-employed, we're business owners. And again, that's a whole can of worms to open up with the government.
Yeah. And Rachel, with your research, did you touch at some point this role of partners and how conflict has affected families?
Yeah, so it is a tricky one because traditionally, as Ian said, you know, women have been the one to take most of the care burden, and this situation kind of leveled the playing field slightly more in terms of the fact that you're both in the house and you could both potentially be the one looking after the children. I think a lot of our respondents found that that wasn't necessarily the case. I mean, we live in a society which is strongly neoliberal. It is not really possible for you to just tread water safely and be loyal to a company anymore. We have to, you know, go upwards all the time, don't we? So, and historically, there are already entrenched inequalities between women and men, like the gender pay gap, which means that maybe your husband will earn more than you, and therefore his job is seen as more important when you're in a black swan crisis situation and everyone wants to keep being paid, because there's that, isn't there, as well? You know, there's this fear around now, and I think our respondents felt that a lot, that jobs are very precarious. You know, what is going to happen when everybody comes off furlough? Maybe businesses will start to lose more employees. And so I think that respondents still felt that inequality because it's already entrenched. I mean, in our research, we talked about in the first stages of it, the working mother actor network and the working father network. And when you're looking at these two networks, which one is stronger? And the one that earns the most is going to be the strongest, isn't it? That is going to have power over the working mother. I mean, that being said, a lot of women are breadwinners. You know, 41% of US mothers were breadwinners for their families before the pandemic started. But women have been much more likely, 1.8 times more likely to give up their job during the pandemic. So it's like, it's really difficult to sort of place an answer on something where there's already a tilted playing field. But I think certainly women found that they were the ones setting the schedule. They were the ones, you know, trying to bring the father on side a bit more. And even in one instance, the respondents sort of said, oh, you know, me man, big job, you woman, make the dinner, sort of thing. And I think in more often than not, that is kind of what happened.
Yeah, okay, you want to add something?
Yeah, can I add to that? Definitely. Totally resonate with that, because I also found you give in a sense as a mother. Well, I did. I gave in terms of I can't let them miss out. They've got this school stuff to do, and I didn't want them to miss out on their learning. So I literally parked myself and put them first. And I think it's just in you it just felt like it was in me to do that kind of thing, you know. And I always say to my husband, whether it's a pandemic or not, I wake up in the morning and I think of the girls first, you know, what they have to wear, breakfast, you know, what time they've got to be out the house, etc. You wake up and you think of you and your coffee first, end off. And it's, you know, and he'll agree with it. I mean, don't get me wrong, we're great, you know, we're a good team at the end of the day. But I just think it's just different thinking, because we are different, male and females. But yeah, I definitely had that sense of, and I, you know, said to my husband, you know, I just feel like right now I'm going to have to park me and make sure that they're okay, because I don't think I can forgive myself if they're behind at school because I couldn't be bothered or I had other things to do. So I took that stance of, like, because you have to look at it on all levels. Can we do this financially? Am I okay to kind of take the you know, take my foot off the accelerator for work? Because when I slow down, my business slows down, because it's all about, for me, content and being out there and marketing. So we took the stance of, yeah, okay, let's focus on them. Don't get me wrong, it was no more easier. You know, my husband definitely saw the fact that I was ready to flip and throttle them all of them, including him at some point. Do you know what I mean? And, you know, he had to take over and help me. And he took time off work as well to homeschool them when he knew I was burnt out. But because it's not just the homeschooling, you're a mum as well. So there's argument. You know, kids are bloody cheeky. They talk to me. They would never dream about talking to their teacher like they talk to me when school learning. So it's all the emotions. You know, you could be happy and then angry and then sad. And then, you know, my 6-year-old is crying because her line is wonky. And it is literally, it's just emotionally draining, the whole thing. But I definitely did feel that take on, you know, like Rachel said, you know, when it comes to women, I did feel that responsibility that I had to kind of give up and give to them. Whether they'll appreciate that is another thing, but you know, I'm sure I can tell them in many years to come, you know.
When when they have their own kids, probably they will realize what you've gone through. And well, in the long term, because Rachel, you mentioned the pay gap, which are the consequences? Is this a step back in the fight for gender equality, or will be the same after a year, 2-year gap?
I don't think so. I mean, we are seeing what's been termed as a she-cession at the moment, aren't we? And I mean, we've seen the stuff in the news today about the pension gap as well. I mean, the pay gap has been exposed, but it hasn't been sort of rectified in lots of different organisations. I mean, my view is that everybody needs to take a little bit of responsibility on different levels. You know, women should be much more highly valued in society. We need much better economics of care. Essentially, we need to be recognised as key actors in the fight against COVID-19, because we have been the ones providing that service so that children could be out of school, so that the infection rate would go down. And historically, governments have treated women's labour as dispensable in times of crisis, such as during the war, for instance. So we do need to do much more to protect women's employment, prioritise the equality agenda as we seek to rebuild the economy, both during and post-pandemic. Things that we could do are making flexible working easier. I mean, the biggest thing for me would be to have more flexible working. That would help me so much. That would enable me. And I don't even necessarily need my husband to have it. If I have it, that is one of the greatest sources of anxiety for me, to be honest, in staying in work. We need to have more supported career leave. We need to have government pension top-ups to solve this, to fix that gap and to value it. Okay, we've got a gap, but if they value it and they fix it, then it's not as bad, is it? Shorter working weeks as well was something that we came up with that would help women more. A 4-day working week as standard, for instance, without a pay sanction involved in that. You know, and definitely fixing the pay gap. Pay gap is, I can't believe that it exists in these times. It's shocking to me, personally, to be honest.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable that the two people with the same curriculum are earning a different salary, but not just few pounds, like big gap. And in fact, Ian, I've read some of your articles and you've written a lot about pay gap and gender equality. And you advocate for that need to support dads that want to keep working, but at the same time want to be present parents. What do you think this are the consequences in the long term for dads at the same time as for mums?
I think it's a really interesting time, because I'm not entirely sure which way this is going to go, because you have dads who always, surveys consistently say that dads want to be more involved with their kids. Survey after survey says exactly the same thing. Pre-pandemic, current, during the pandemic, it always says the same thing, that dads want to be more involved fathers, who want to be the father they don't remember growing up. Talking to, something that sort of Kate mentioned before about a generational shift in what dads experience and what they want to experience. But there is this society overlay in terms of expectations around men being breadwinners and women being carers. And when we get to a crisis point, then that puts pressure on, and the individual families make individual choices. Now, it's different in my home, and why I find it fascinating is because I'm a man whose wife is the main breadwinner by a factor of, I would not like to say how big a factor it is in her favor. And I've always been, so as long as we've had kids, I've always been the primary carer. So I see it in a traditionally sort of female mum sort of environment, that I see those sort of pressures exert themselves. And I've lost my train of thought. I think the optionality, I think this is one of the biggest things about the challenge at the moment, is this sense that for men, it is often optional to lean in and get involved. Society doesn't expect them to. Therefore, if they're seen as being taking a step back and actually prioritizing their family, they fear being seen as uncommitted. And I think one of the biggest challenges around flexible working, I absolutely agree with Rachel in terms of the mechanics of flexible working being an enabler for women, and women gain the most from flexible working, and generally because of these ingrained because of these sort of practical pressures really about who looks after children. Because actually, if you were to have two employees, maybe they're early 30s, one's a man, one's a woman, and if you can't tell who's going to take extended parental leave, who's going to want to work flexibly, who's going to want to work 4 days a week, you can't discriminate in whichever way, whether it's overtly or otherwise. You can't discriminate about who's the best prospect for the business, because you've leveled the playing field for both candidates in that way. And so I think a major way of improving things for gender equality on a long-term basis is for businesses to understand that there's a tension at home. If you're demanding that all your employees go back into the workplace, and that there's lots of men who don't want to do that, it creates tension. If we assume that men don't have any caring responsibilities, then we are effectively saying that women have all the responsibility. It's only when we see men and women as equally capable and interested in caring and looking after their children do we break this sort of cycle whereby whereby some of the benefits which have been hard earned and incredibly important in terms of maternity are seen as perks just for mums. And if men aren't seen as being able to access flexible working, then it reinforces and it keeps it there. So anything we can do to help understand, to break some of the fear that men feel about not being seen committed, especially in the current climate, understanding the tension at home. If we just assume that the man in the office, he'll just go back into the office, of course he will, we'll go back to how we always were. If we don't understand that, we assume that men don't want to look after children, and we just keep reinforcing it. And I think anything we can do to make flexible working in particular being genuinely seen as an option for everyone, and male leadership role models showing that anyone can take it. So if you're a man with young children and you're looking up the business structure, for instance, and you see other men in senior positions who are modeling flexible working, you say, oh, well, it's okay to do this. And I think that societal change, it's a really interesting time now, whether we'll actually see enough men who really want to put their necks on the line, and families as well. If you've only got one income, if you've got a situation now where there's only one income, then you need to maintain that. And I think it's a massive chicken and egg. And it does concern me as to which way the gender equality piece will go, and whether men will actually step up and reap some of those longer term benefits that they've seen on a short term basis.
Yeah, Rachel, you want to add?
I do think that the pandemic, one of the greatest opportunities that we could take from the pandemic is to see that flexible working is entirely possible whilst also paying people in the normal way. Because one of the things that I think a lot of organizations could do now, and that Ian says is the way that it could go badly, is to say, okay, yeah, you can have flexible working, but you've got to pay for it. That little bit of time that you take to go and get someone from school maybe once or twice a week, you've got to pay for that now. And that is a real danger. Whereas what organizations could do is see this as, wow, yeah, we coped really well with this. We've maintained our productivity during this time. We've allowed people to work flexibly, previously a big fear of ours, and we can do it. So let's sort of allow that a little bit more freely now. And I think that would be a big enabler for both employed women and employed men to have better well-being within the workforce. So it's not a special thing, it is just a bit more permissible.
Yeah, and actually, you just said the key word, well-being at work. So with this mental overload that has been the lockdown for working moms, but also working dads, and you were saying, Kate, that you had those burned out moments, this is going to affect us individually also. And Kate, how do you see yourself in the future after this pandemic is gone, hopefully? do you think this will have still like lasting consequences by then?
I think I think what it has learned is the fact that I have to look after myself a lot more. I do have to be selfish sometimes and say I need that hour to kind of like close the door, if that's what you mean from a well-being point of view. You know, my husband and I, we're, you know, I'm into yoga and we're both actually into meditation. You know, we have anxiety and I suffer from depression as well. So it is a case of maintaining that balance and knowing where the line needs to be drawn to then look after yourself, but maybe look after yourself before the line has to be drawn. And pressure, I think less pressure on myself to do it all. I think that is key as well. I think that's something that has come out from it, or will hopefully. It's only been day one. It's only been like 5 hours, you know? So I've already had like breakfast on my own, win. You know, had a little break before here, win. And it is those little tiny breaks where you can do what you want when you want. And I think that's what you need to remember. And then have that family time. But with the kids, you know, I had to move into the spare room during lockdown to work. And then my husband couldn't work because he got closed down essentially like everyone else in the first 3 months. So he then took over my office. So I was hot desking in my own house to try and work. And then he went back. And then basically during this lockdown, my kids were sharing a room and they were like at each other. And it's understanding that they need their own space. So I had to kind of pack up and give the bedroom back. And I think it's just understanding everyone's each own boundary, even though they're really young and 6 and 9, but they still want their own space and their own time out and their own, you know, their own way of playing or so forth. But even if it's just on an iPad or something, they don't want their little sister or they don't want mum and dad talking to them while they're on Roblox or something. I don't know. But I think it's just learning that we're all family, but we all need different things. And it's about kind of like maintaining boundaries between us and just also know it's important that we need to look after ourselves, our well-being, and just have that time. Take that time, even if it's just 10 minutes to go and stand outside in the garden and ground yourself or walk around the block. I think that's definitely something that I've learned, but I don't think there's going to be any lasting bad that would come from it. Only, you know, you can't regret and wish you'd done less or more. It is what it is. We deal what we had to do with what we had at the time, and we had to face our own mental health each day, and we push through it, you know, because it's the unknown, isn't it? And hopefully now, you know, I'm a mother of 2 at the end of the day, and I get 6 hours now to myself. And it's about routine for me. I have to have that structure and routine in order to create my business. That's my livelihood, and that's my thing for me. So that's hopefully what will now happen going forward, unless we get a call from the school and there's some kids got COVID and then I've got the kids again for 10 days. That's the uncertainty we have at the moment. We just don't know what's going to happen. But yeah, I think well-being and just looking after ourselves, I think that's definitely something I'm going to take with me.
Okay. And I don't know, Rachel, if in your research you touch you mentioned before this roller coaster of emotions. Have you touched at any point with your participants how they coped, or the tools or solutions they try to find to cope with that roller coaster of emotions?
I think a lot of things that people did, like Kate has just touched on a couple of them, were very simple. So, you know, walking around the block or taking 10 minutes in a room by yourself. I mean, a lot of the things that I think people have found coping mechanisms in is like just simply standing and staring out of the window for a little bit. It was one of the things that quite a few people said. We got like a lot of pictures of just people like looking out the window. And it is simple things, I think, with employed mothers who don't have a lot of time for self-care, if in fact maybe even none, if they're working and looking after children at the same time. It is a cup of coffee while it's hot sitting down with nobody pestering you. It is just a small little gap from the constant state of interruptedness that is motherhood. So I don't think there was anything too elaborate in that. I mean, we did have quite a lot of pictures from like the insides of laundry rooms where people were stood having a little cry maybe, or locking themselves in the toilet for a wee, which went on a lot longer than it actually did. So yeah, I do think that people's well-being has suffered hugely during this time. And I think a lot of people will reflect now on the branching paths in front of them and what they want for their family. So hopefully people can take something good from that in the future.
And thinking like pessimistically, let's say, if a lockdown number 4 would come up, how would be the situation then? Do you think something will change or not?
I think Kate has also touched on it as well quite nicely, because I've sort of been feeling the same personally. Like if my children hadn't have been in their early years settings for this last while, you come to a point of thinking, hang on a minute, it's not just about financial gain in my work. I've got to prioritize and nurture my family at the end of the day. Like one of the things that, so I think if there was a lockdown number 4, you might see like a bit more of a wave of giving up and retrenching back, as your family, you can't just neglect them. Like a lot of things that the respondent said and that I have found personally, it was like, what am I going to do? I can't just neglect, you can't neglect young children. It's not possible to do that. And it's definitely not possible with very young children that you physically need to watch so that they're safe. So I think if there was lockdown number 4, you might see more people giving up, sadly, because we have seen as we've gone along, sort of like we might have had one respondent, I think, that gave up closer to the beginning, but there's been like 2, 3, 4 as we've gone along. So I think the longer something like this goes on, the worse the effect gets, possibly.
Well, thank you for that. I think, well, it's 20 past and I'm going to pass the word to Ollie, my partner in crime at Liverpool Fashion Summit, to manage the Q&A session.
Thanks, Julia. And thank you, Ian, Rachel and Keith. That's, it's quite nice to just sit here and listen for once and not have to try to direct the conversation. If anyone does have any questions, please do unmute yourself. Please do turn your video on if you so wish and ask away. If not, there are a couple of things that came up for me. So 3, 2, 1. No, I'm going to go ahead then. Maybe this is a question really for Rachel, because I suppose it is research or insight based. And to what extent me being a man has directed this question, I'm not really too sure. And I'm not necessarily trying to be provocative with it either, but I think there's an interesting dialogue to be had. I think I fear the horizontal division of men on this side and women on this side. I'm not sure whether, I think it explains a lot, but I'm not sure whether it explains enough. So I'm wondering, Rachel, in your research, if you've seen any further ways to segment the sort of the dyad between men and women.
That is an interesting question. I'm not sure if, I mean, there's so many different personal circumstances, isn't there? Like you can't really say, oh, all men feel like this or all women feel like this, because we all have multiple subjectivities and a different life in front of us and a different situation. I mean, a good way, I think, to start looking at the effects that the pandemic has had on people is through an intersectional lens. So people who have been more affected are probably women, but women in a BAME minority have been more affected. Women who are in poverty would have been more affected. So intersectionality puts a different kind of lens on an analysis. But I agree. I don't think there should be like, oh, you're a man, so you feel like this, and you're a woman, so you should feel like this. It's, but I do think that when you think of things in a macro kind of way, there are certain trends that women generally earn less because they have more caring responsibilities, and men generally don't have the impacts of that so much. Is that what you mean by your question?
Yeah, I think so. I would, being part of this conversation, I'd love to be closer to the research, but I'm not, so I'm not sure what's
Read
been.
if it gets published.
Oh, I'm sure it will. I'm sure it will. I don't know whether Ian and Kate have got any reflections on that question.
Oliver, say again. So you're thinking about the division between men and women?
Up on the spot.
I was just thinking about it. I was just trying to give it. Yeah, I have ideas. But I just want to make sure I'm following the right idea.
Yeah, I suppose. I think my question was, I'm unsure whether the most appropriate way to segment the population now is along that binary division of men on this side and women on this side. I wonder whether we're now at a point where there can be some more nuance.
I think it's important. I agree with Rachel. I think on the macro level, you can't deny the overall data picture. So I'm in various Facebook groups, a couple of men-only Facebook groups, and you won't find a single man who does not absolutely split 50-50 the work and domestic labour in his household. You almost won't find any man who will admit to that. You will occasionally. There was a man called Liam who posted on the Dadsnet forum, which I think is just men, and he said, I'm a bit embarrassed by some of the things I've been reading about work, and actually, for him it was an epiphany, and actually said, I'm lying in bed, my wife just brought me a coffee, and I know she's been up for the last 2 hours with the kids, and she's working on her business stuff. What am I to have this right? And it's opened my eyes to some of these tensions. I think I would reframe it slightly in that I think what's really important sort of going forward is for everyone to understand the pressures, the societal pressures, and what we expect for men and what we expect for women in particular. And therefore, society's done a lot of work and business done a lot of work in terms of enabling women to fulfill their potential in the workplace. But what we haven't done as a society or in businesses is to recognize that we still expect women to do everything in some ways, is that women have this third shift idea as well. And that actually men are looking around saying this isn't fair either. There are lots of men, and if surveys that look at younger generations will find there's a shift in men's attitudes coming through behind. And actually to tap into that and say, actually, men experience the working world in a different way because we assume they don't have to look after children in many ways, and it's not likely to matter. So this idea that actually for women, it almost doesn't matter whether they have children or not. We assume that they will, or we assume they'll have caring responsibilities. But if we can break that assumption, then I think it makes it much easier. So I think it is right to look at men and women separately, because I think the pressures and the fears, the fear and the guilt. So guilt on maybe a mum's side and maybe fear on a dad's side in terms of being able to provide. I think if we can understand those and then follow that thread through and say, actually, well, we do need to look at men in a different way to enable them to maybe step back and change how they look, so that what success looks like in the workplace does change. I'll just to finish it off, there's something that a client of my wife, she was a young woman, early 30s, I guess, didn't have any children, and she said, I met her for the first time, and she said to me, when I started work with your wife, I didn't think she had children because I didn't think a woman with children could do this job. And she said to me, and I realized how incredibly damaging that was, not just for my perception of her as she was a senior lawyer in the business at the time. She said, and also my opportunities, if I assumed that as a woman, and the opportunities of every young woman around me, we were closing off an entire career path because someone had children. And she said, and I realized I wouldn't have said that about a man.
Great, thank you for that, Ian. I don't know whether there's anything from you, Kate?
No, not really. Just a huge, just reflecting on what Ian and Rachel said. I totally agree.
Yeah.
Society has put us into pots, haven't they, really? But like what Ian said, I actually, when we had our first child, about a year in after maternity leave, we relocated from London to Liverpool. And then I actually got a full-time job, and I was the breadwinner. My husband took the year and looked after our daughter. It's, for us, that made financial sense. It is about each family is different, but the fact that we're okay to have that conversation, we're quite like, early adopters, as it were. We had that conversation and it was cool and it was fine, and we did it what was right for our family. But like what Ian and Rachel say, in society, in the bigger realm, it's a case of, well, no, men need to go out for work and women need to stay at home with the children, or if anything happens, women stay at home. It's not everybody has that same opinion that men can actually look after the children. But they can, they absolutely can. It's, I don't like this women pot and men pot. We're all here together and to support each other. This boy club and girl club, I hate it. I've got friends who have got young boys, and they've grown up with, compassion and know what's fair and equality. Maybe it's just like an old stance that it's not going to happen quick, but will hopefully kind of like be stamped out, and hopefully 10 to 20 years during the next generation. But I think, I do believe we're all here to be together and support each other. You can't do without me, I can't do without you, kind of thing. And that's how we have it in our house. We're on the same team at the end of the day. We want the same outcome, and we've got to pull together to get that. So when he has to work late, I take over the house, and when I have to work late, he takes over the house, kind of thing. And that's our, and we don't give a shit what anyone else says outside this house. That's how it works for us. And that was my first swear in an hour. I'm quite impressed with myself.
I've got to say, it's usually 5 minutes in, Kate. No, but I think I am aware of time. I've got 2 minutes left, so just one last question. Try and keep these answers short. I've got a friend who's part of an NGO called The Circle. So everyone have a look on Twitter for The Circle NGO. And I think it's founded or co-founded by Annie Lennox. And she was having a conversation with Annie Lennox one day, and Annie Lennox turned around to her and said, if men aren't in this conversation about gender equality, then we're only having half the conversation. And in order to get, real systemic, bottom-up, ground-up change, both men and women need to be in the conversation. Now, I think it's quite fitting that apart from myself and Ian, and we have to be here because we're organising it and talking, the majority of people who've attended this today are women, which is fine, which is great. But there's a clear need to involve more men in this conversation. So again, very quickly, not to rush you, but how do we do that? I don't know whether we start, Rachel.
How do we do it? I'm not entirely sure how we do it. To get men involved in the conversation, I think needs to be more of a structural thing. I mean, the advert that the Conservative government put out of the man sitting on the sofa and the woman doing everything, running around him, it's certainly not a good indicator that men should be in the conversation, is it? But I just think that slowly over time, as there's sort of like a trickle of generational difference between people, that men hopefully will start to get more involved in the conversation. I mean, we have made like advances in gender equality, some advances in the last couple of decades, with shared parental leave probably being, I don't know the figures, but probably being taken up a little bit more. So I think it is a drip, drip, drip thing, and a way of maybe on an individual level of just encouraging, you should have a male targeted adverts for these events, for example. and pester men to come along, key stakeholders to come along.
I think we'll note that down. Julia, we'll do that for next year.
We need a bit of artificial intelligence on this that just tells men to come along.
Yeah. I'm just looking at the time, Ian, Kate, I'm really sorry. I think we do have to stop there, but love to get your answers and maybe tag us in social media, Twitter, etc. And we'll try to retweet the hell out of it. Julia, I'll pass back over to you. Thank you all for your time and for answering my questions.
Thanks, Ollie.
Well, that's it. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Ian, Rachel, and Kate. I hope it's been an amazing session, or at least enjoyable. I think like the key outcome is that we need change, but to offer the possibility of choosing, both men and women, what they want to do without affecting their professional lives. If they want to get involved in parenting, we should be free to do it. We'll be sharing the video on our social media. Just look for Liverpool Fashion Summit, and we hope to see you soon. If you want to stay in contact, just send us an email and we'll be more than happy to reply back. Thank you all.
Thanks, Julia.
Thank you.
Thank you.